Hi everybody, welcome to Bike Revs. I'm Mark. Now it's winter in the UK, the roads are what I can only describe as a bit shitty, the weather's awful, and the bike is getting absolutely covered in muck. So every weekend I have to wash the bike now, and very soon we're going to start getting salt on the roads in the UK, which stops them from getting icy. And that's great for grip, but it's not so good for the bike because it'll get covered in salty water and that needs to be washed off every single night. Now, during the course of doing all these videos, reading forums and so on, I picked up lots of top tips about cleaning bikes. And so what I want to share with you today is a bunch of things, I can't remember how many there are, but a bunch of things that are to do with what you shouldn't really do when you're washing your bike. These are all comments that, as I say, I've received and I've read. So if you think any of it's wrong, let me know. And if you've got any top tips, put them in the comments below, and then perhaps we'll do a part 2 to this video. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is this thing, the jet washer. Now, I know that they're great. If you've got a really muddy bike and you're into off-roading, it gets all those massive clumps of mud off the bike. It's brilliant. It's good on my mucky old truck as well. It's great for cleaning the drive. But honestly, with a street bike like this, I've not been off-road on it, obviously. I find it's got limited use. I mean, I can pretty much spray it from a distance and it will sort of make the bike look wet and it'll get some of the muck off, but you always get left with this film of dirt all over the bike, so it's not particularly effective. But more importantly than that, you can do your bike some real damage. Now, this bike is designed to ride through the rain at motorway speeds all day long in the rain, and the rain lashes into the front of it. It'll be absolutely fine and it will just start again the next time you get on it. It never cuts out. Rain doesn't affect it in that way. You can also stand it out in the rain and quite honestly not much is going to go wrong. But what it's not designed to do is take a blast of water from this thing at all angles. So why not? Well, you've got things like the radiator fins, which are really delicate, and this will bend those fins, and that's a real pain. So it's quite tempting to sort of get that in there and spray it and clean out the radiator, but that's a bad thing to do. The other thing is, of course, you've got all these delicate electrics up inside here, which are normally protected. If you start spraying into there, you're going to get water into your electrics. Now, you can also get water into your exhaust pipe, and that's a really bad thing, but we'll talk about that later. And the other thing that you might not have considered is this switch gear. Now, as I say, you can ride through the rain at motorway speeds and the water won't affect these switches, but if you start spraying water in at this angle, it gets inside these and it plays havoc with the contacts. And I've had this on a bike before where I've hopped on it after washing the bike and I can't get the bike to start. It's almost as if that's turned off, and that's because there was either a short in there or under there, and I had to dry the whole bike out and clean it all out. So my first top tip is, why use a pressure washer? It's not particularly good at cleaning the bike. You could potentially damage it, and it's much easier to go inside and fill yourself up with a bucket of water rather than go into all the faff of plugging that in. So there you go. Leave your pressure washer in the garage. Now, having said all that, my mate Adam over at Sweet Triple has just done an excellent video on bike cleaning, and in it he uses a jet washer to great effect. However, his jet washer does have variable power and a snow foam attachment, but even he points out the possible pitfalls of jet washer usage. I'm sticking with a bucket and hosepipe, although that snow foam does look like about as much fun as you can have washing a bike with your clothes on. Right then, number 2 is all about these brushes. Now, brushes are really good for getting into all the really difficult bits, getting around your brakes and the suspension and so on, but they're not always good. Now, I've got a bunch of mates who are really into detailing, car detailing, that sort of thing. Not my cup of tea. I'm more a sort of wash and go, but those guys that are really into it will tell you that you should never ever get your brush and go anywhere near the paintwork. These things pick up bits of dirt. You never quite know what's in the brush. Quite a lot of nastiness in that one, and so if you start putting that on your paintwork, it does scratch it. Even if it's a fresh, clean, brand new brush, it's going to leave micro scratches all over that tank. So just best to avoid that altogether. Much better, get yourself a sponge. Not only that, they're cheaper than brushes, and then use a sponge to do that, or a soft, clean cloth. And that's really it for brushes. There are useful places you can use them, but just don't go near your paintwork. Right, this next one's interesting and slightly contentious, so you may not believe it, and I'd be interested to know what you think. So as I mentioned, here in the UK, we tend to put salt out on the roads, and that stops the ice from forming and gives us plenty of grip. It's much safer, which is brilliant. And they do put quite a lot of salt on the road. So of course, you get salty water that gets flicked all over the bike, and then it dries out and leaves a film of salt everywhere. Now, salt and metal, there's a corrosive action that happens, there's a chemical reaction, and so it can really damage the paint. It can cause it to crack and peel off. It just eats its way into everything. It's horrible stuff. So you need to get that off. And as I say, I tend to wash the bike down every night once it gets salty. So what I've always done is to use a bucket of nice hot water, and I put that hot water all over the bike. I give it a wash, and I start at the top, work my way down, and I wash all the salt off. I might give it a hose down afterwards. In fact, I might even use soapy water to start with, which again is going to be something we'll talk about in just a moment. So here's the problem. Hot water dissolves salt really well. So what I'm doing when I'm putting this hot water on the bike is actually dissolving the salt and pushing it even further into the little cracks and crevices around the bike, and it's much worse for it. So in actual fact, don't use hot water when your bike's been out on a salty road. Much better to use a good old hose pipe. Now I've obviously got a standard garden sprinkler on the end of mine. I wouldn't put a pressure washer on the end of it. Just a sprinkler will do fine. Keep it at the end of the exhaust pipe and wash down all of that salt. I think that is probably the best idea, and that's what I'll be doing every night in the next coming months. Doesn't take a moment, keeps your bike looking lovely. Okay, now for the next one, we really are getting into the realms of, is that really true? So for many years I've always used nice hot buckets of water with plenty of that in it. That's just household washing up liquid, and you stick that in the water, you get a nice foamy mixture, and you slather it all over the bike and get the bike all soapy. It gets the dirt off, a real treat. That's for when you're doing the sort of weekend wash, not on a kind of nightly basis. But I have been told by very many forums and experts in detailing that this stuff has actually got salt in it, and it's really bad for you to put it onto your paintwork and just generally onto any metalwork. Now, I've been using it, like I say, for very many years, and I've never noticed it cause any harm. However, now that I've been told it's not very good for my bike, I'm kind of thinking I probably shouldn't be doing this. So I'm going to wash that off very quickly in a moment. And then when I do actually clean the bike, I'm going to use this. And this, I'm not sponsored as usual, but this stuff is quite simply Ultra Wash and Wax, which is used for cars and motorcycles. This one's wash and wax. They do all sorts of different ones, and I bought it from B&Q, my local hardware store, for less than a tenner, and I get all of that, and I think it's 3 capfuls per bucket, so this is going to last me a lifetime, and it makes it much cheaper than using that stuff. So there we go. Should you be using standard washing up liquid to wash your bike? I think probably the answer is no. Okay then, I don't know what number we're on now, but one of the things that I should have done first is to make sure that I protected the end of this exhaust pipe. Now, as I mentioned in the video earlier, you don't want to get water in here, and I'll go into the reasons why not in just a moment, but there's all sorts of ways you can protect that. For me, I just stick on an old plastic bag, and I use a hairband there, and I put that round an elastic band. Piece of plastic works fine. You could also use one of these special plugs that you can buy that go in the end of your exhaust to stop it from getting wet in there, and you could even use a condom, although I would offer some caution, because certainly if my wife found a box of condoms in the garage, I'd be answering some very difficult questions. Now, you've probably got a stainless steel exhaust pipe like I've got here, not a mild steel one like you used to get on the old cars. So it's stainless steel, but it will still rust through. So if you put water in the end of your exhaust and you've left it to sort of settle in the winter where you haven't ridden your bike, it can start to rot the exhaust pipe from the inside. More than that, of course, it could even get through and get to your catalytic converter. It's pretty unlikely with this one, with the big bread box down below, but it depends on your exhaust setup. So you could end up with water in your catalytic converter, and that's just a fine mesh of different metals which will rust and corrode. So that would obviously be bad. More than that though, obviously there's lots of exhaust residue that's inside that pipe, and on its own it's usually all right, but if you mix it with water, you get this really sort of toxic paste, or a toxic kind of watery substance made up of like exhaust soot and water, and that is really nasty stuff. So it's just a bad thing to have in the exhaust pipe. If you do get some in there, start the engine, get it heated up and get the vapor blasted out the end of it. But again, heating up the water and leaving the vapor in there just causes it to get even deeper into the nooks and crannies inside your exhaust. And again, it's bad. It's just a bad thing all around to stick water into your exhaust pipe. So that's why they're kind of shaped with this little bit of a hood on the end of it to stop that happening with the rain. So there you go. Make sure you always rubber up. Right, next up I want to talk about protecting this tank again. In one of my videos, I can't remember which one, but I showed me putting on some car wax, and I put the wax on, wax off, and the tank comes up with a lovely sheen. It just protects it. And somebody wrote a comment on that video, and they said, well, I see your bike is a 2020 Z900 in the matte black finish, and I do hope you enjoy the gloss finish on your tank, ha ha. And I thought, what are you talking about? Because all I was doing was putting wax on, and it's not abrasive in any way. We'll check the label, that stuff's fine. It's just a layer of wax, and then you polish it off, it's fine. This stuff, on the other hand, is probably what he thought I was doing, and this is T-cut, and this stuff is, well, in the right hands, for the right situation, fantastic. So this stuff's actually a metallic T-cut. I don't tend to use it anyway, but if I do use that on there, and I know this because I did it on a previous bike, it will take this matte black finish and it does turn it into gloss. That should be avoided on all of the paint on this bike. As I say, if you've got the right T-cut for the right job and the right kind of paint, it's probably really good. Well, in fact, it is really good. I've used it several times, but yeah, I wouldn't go near this paint with this. I remember the days back in the 70s and 80s when tanks were painted with oil-based paint and they had thick layers of gloss on them and nothing could touch them. But the paint these days, as I've talked about lots in these videos, it just doesn't seem like it's the quality that they used to use in the old days, and it's, I think, water-based paint. So yeah, just don't go near it with T-cut. Only a couple of things left to talk about now, and this is to do with when we're cleaning the bike off at the end. Now, to dry it off, I always use one of these. It's a chamois leather, and I'm due a new one. Make sure it's clean. You wet it first so that it's nice and soft, and then you can run that over your paintwork and everywhere else, and it stops the water from drying in streaks, and it stops you getting all those water droplet marks and so on. It's really, really useful. Use one of those every time. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Tell me otherwise. So what I have to be a bit careful of is that I showed in my previous videos, or one of them, was a dryer that I created out of a vacuum cleaner. Now, it works a treat. It really does dry the bike off well, and it gets all the water out of the nooks and crannies and so on. But you just have to be really careful with a dryer, because if you've got water around these switches, once again, what you can end up doing is blowing water into the switch gear, and you need to be really careful not to do that. So just be careful around all the switches and the electrics when you're using a dryer. So last but never least, the good old ACF 50. Now, we've all come to love and know this stuff. So when the bike's dry and clean, spray it all over, work it into the awkward parts with the paintbrush. Talked about it a lot in one of my previous videos, and I use that paintbrush just for putting that stuff on. So it's a 75mm paintbrush, gets into all the places, love it. Right, that's fantastic, but just be careful with it. Don't get it on your hand grips. Definitely don't get it on the foot grips. It's a disaster. If you've got wet boots and ACF 50 on there, two surfaces of rubber with ACF 50 in between is a very slippery situation. The other thing is, don't get it on your brake rotors or your brake pads, or just basically anywhere near your brakes, because it can become very difficult to stop. Obviously, I mean, it does burn off eventually, but it's really bad for your brake pads. So don't get that anywhere near your brakes. Just be careful with it. But that aside, get some ACF 50 in your life. Well, that's about it for top tips of things you really shouldn't do when you're cleaning your bike. So leave some comments below. Like I say, perhaps we'll do a part 2 of other things that you shouldn't do, or perhaps we'll be a bit more positive next time and talk about things you should do. But I'll just leave you with 2 other things. The first thing is, that has just sprung to mind, and that is, if you're cleaning your bike, don't wear trainers. My feet are absolutely soaking. And the second thing is, of course, always keep your chain oiled. Right, I'll see you all soon. Now, you can buy these special bungs that go in the end of them, a bit like a butt plug really, I'm told.